Good afternoon, everybody. Before I begin, can I please encourage you all to switch off your cell phones or put them on a silent mode, but preferably switch them off. Minister Chidambaram, Ambassador Jaishankar, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me both pleasure and pain to welcome you to this event. It gives me pleasure because Minister Chidambaram does our school a great honor by coming here to address us. But it gives me pain because as a moderator, I only have 5 minutes to introduce a truly distinguished guest. In 5 minutes, I cannot do justice to the many remarkable qualities of our guest of honor. He's a respected politician, an accomplished lawyer, a Harvard-educated intellectual, a popular community leader, an ardent supporter of the arts, a successful author, an avid sportsman, and a man of vision, and I can carry on. But given the limited time, I'm going to follow the advice of my guru, Ambassador Tomiko, and focus on only 3 points on Minister Chidambaram. First, let me speak of Minister Chidambaram, the reformer. Now, we all know that something remarkable has happened and is happening to the Indian economy. India has emerged as a new economic tiger as a result of the reform policies carried out, especially since 1991. Remarkably, there's a coincidence between India's emergence as an economic tiger and Minister Chidambaram's career in politics. Now, this is probably more than a coincidence. There's no doubt that when the real history of India's emergence as an economic tiger is written, an enormous amount of credit will be given to Minister Chidambaram. And let me quote what Prime Minister Manmohan Singh said about his contribution. He said, and I quote, "Even the most ardent reformers find it difficult to obliterate their own empires of power and patronage. But this is what Chidambaram did as Commerce Minister. I think he was one of the few ministers who presided over the shrinking of his own ministry, disproving the usual notions of political economy that all politicians and bureaucrats aim to expand their economic empires." This, of course, is a lesson for our students in the School of Public Policy. And Prime Minister Manmohan Singh said he closed down sections of the ministry that had been rendered redundant by changes in industrial and trade policy. In this regard, he embodies the hopes of many in Asia that through the acts of courageous leaders who are willing to buck the trend, this region can and will be transformed for the better. Unquote, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. And last night, I happened by chance to meet our Finance Minister, Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam. He told me that what truly distinguishes Minister Chidambaram is that he's a reformer with a heart. And that is why, as you know, his recent budget reached out to the rural poor also. And here, as an aside, let me mention that it is remarkable that the two best finance ministers in the world today are both Tamils, Minister Chidambaram and Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam. Second, let me talk about Minister Chidambaram, the Davos man. Indeed, I first encountered Minister Chidambaram over 10 years ago in Davos. He appeared on our panel with our Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Hsien Loong, when Mr. Lee was then the Deputy Prime Minister. It was already clear that while the Minister is comfortable in the villages of India, he's equally comfortable in a global village like Davos. And indeed, he has emerged as a leading global voice, and he demonstrated this most recently at the last Davos meeting, where he was clearly the star of the BBC World Debate Show, which is called Global Economic Shock, Perfect Storm Ahead, produced by Nick Gowing. And we are fortunate to have a global voice like Minister Chidambaram address our school today. Now, third, let me mention Minister Chidambaram, the argumentative Indian. Now, for the benefit of the Singaporeans in the audience, let me explain that the phrase argumentative Indian is a badge of honor, especially after the best-selling book by Amartya Sen of the same title. And indeed, the chairman of the Penguin Group, which published Minister Chidambaram's book, has said that Minister Chidambaram symbolizes the argumentative Indian at its finest. And the world will be better off if we see the emergence of more argumentative Indians. Why do I say this? I say this because we are entering a truly plastic phase of human history. We will see far greater shifts of power than we have seen before with the rise of new Asian powers like China and India. They will transform the globe. And history teaches us that such transformations can lead to tension and conflict unless they are well managed. And when a new debate begins on how to accommodate their rise, I'm confident that Minister Chidambaram will be a leading voice in this debate. And this is why we are truly privileged to have him with us to share his views, which are published in his book, and I'm happy to show you a copy, The View from the Outside, Why Good Economics Works for Everyone. It is a compilation of articles that he wrote for Indian Express, whose editor, Shekhar Gupta, is here. And welcome to Singapore too, Shekhar. Thank you for coming. By the way, he flew in today and is flying out tonight just for this event. And this is the articles that Shekhar edited also. Although I noticed in the foreword you said they was not allowed to touch a word of it, right? Am I correct? From the summer, he wrote it from the summer of 2002 until the summer of 2004, when he got his current assignment. This book is a succinct and lucid explanation of how the academic discipline of economics can be made to work for the good of society and the common man. And in this regard, he embodies what a school of public policy aspires to produce: highly educated practitioners, scholars with a civic consciousness. Now, it gives me great pleasure to call on Minister Chidambaram to address us. Minister.
Thank you. Mr. Kishore Mahbubani, High Commissioner of India and Singapore, High Commissioner of Pakistan and Singapore, my editor, Mr. Shekhar Gupta, faculty and students. Kishore was very generous in his introduction, and I'm very happy to be here. It's always a nice feeling to be back in a school, except that when I was in school, they didn't build classrooms like this. It's an honor to be invited to speak at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, Singapore. It would not be an exaggeration to say that Mr. Lee Kuan Yew is the founding father of modern Singapore. During his long tenure as Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew stood out as a symbol of a dynamic, progressive, and pluralist city-state. He was and is regarded as an unorthodox statesman. He is respected for his strong views and fearless expression of those views in world fora. Singapore, it is said, lives by its wits, and it is universally acknowledged that much of that wit and wisdom are owed to one person, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. This school itself is a symbol of the global city that is Singapore in the making. As your dean says in his welcome address on the website, I quote, "While the curricula are similar to those offered in other leading schools of public policy around the world, they are also outstanding for their emphasis on the public policy experiences of Asian countries and the critical challenges facing them." Unquote. I'm happy to note that the students of this school are drawn from all countries of the world and especially from Asia. Therefore, the matters that I speak on today may strike a chord in many of you and may remind you of your experience in your own country. What is up there is the title of the book, but the title of my lecture is Sustaining Growth Amidst Global Uncertainty. The Indian experience over the last 3 decades has been one of sustained growth, with each decade bringing an improvement over the previous one. Between 1971-72 and 1980-81, the average GDP growth was 3.2% a year. In the subsequent 2 decades, the growth rate was 5.4% and 5.6% a year, respectively. Since 2001-2002, we have witnessed an average growth rate of 7.6% a year until 2007-8. In fact, in 2005-6, it was 9.4%. In 2006-7, it was 9.6%. And the year that is coming to an end in a week from today will still return a growth close to 9%. This experience is unique in many ways, since it has been based on the principles of democracy and rule of law. This has allowed us to carry the people with us at every stage, and in spite of numerous challenges, we have not deviated from our reform agenda. The agenda is one of sustained growth in a market economy that takes care of its poor and disadvantaged. While markets ensure efficiency, a democratic governing system ensures that the reform process has a human face. The constant challenge is to maintain macroeconomic stability, and in particular, price stability. The 2 factors that cause misery to the poor are inflation and loss of jobs. As you're aware, these 2 factors are highly correlated to the structural adjustment process. When inflation rises, or when there are large-scale job losses, the people begin to question the justification and advantages of reforms. In a democratic system, governments are under pressure to slow down and sometimes reverse the reform process. However, in India, we have been able to ward off such pressures by taking a number of steps to lessen the negative impact of reforms. We have not hesitated to use fiscal, monetary, and public policy instruments to contain inflation and to ensure that the growth process creates jobs. Let me recount briefly the steps that we have taken to sustain economic growth amidst growing uncertainty. At the start of the tenure of the present government, we took a bold step and notified the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, for short, the FRBM Act. In retrospect, it is acknowledged that it was a wise and courageous decision. The FRBM Act requires the government to reduce the fiscal deficit every year by 0.3% of GDP and eventually to bring it to a level below 3% by 2008-09. It also requires the government to reduce the revenue deficit every year by 0.5% of GDP and eventually to eliminate it by 2008-09. My government inherited a fiscal deficit of 4.5% in 2003-04. We are on course to bring down the fiscal deficit to 2.5% in 2008-09. Likewise, the government inherited a revenue deficit of 3.6% in 2003-04, while we have been able to reduce the revenue deficit by 0.5% a year, and that means that we have adhered to the path of fiscal correction. We are not able to eliminate the revenue deficit, and it will be 1% by the end of 2008-09. In order to eliminate the revenue deficit completely, we ought to have done better than a reduction of 0.5% a year. That, however, has not been possible because much of our expenditure on education, healthcare, drinking water, sanitation, rural roads, etc., is classified as revenue expenditure. Nonetheless, our achievement is considered very satisfactory. On a lighter vein, I may add that the critics of the FRBM Act have expressed satisfaction that we have allowed ourselves a revenue deficit of 1% and have not compressed unduly the revenue expenditure. The second instrument to contain inflation, as well as to stimulate job-creating growth, is fiscal policy. In January 2004, the peak rate of customs duty was 25%. Today it is 10%. In fact, the collection rate, that is the effective applied rate of all taxes and imports for all goods, is only 10%. Excise duty, which is a duty on value addition in manufacture, has also been moderated to 14%. In the cases of goods of mass consumption, the rates are even lower. Many goods are at 0% and many others are at 8%. Service tax, which is a tax on value addition in services, is kept at 12%, well below international benchmarks. Let me give you two examples where fiscal policy has been used to advance the objectives of price stability and growth. We think that India can become a hub for small cars. Accordingly, excise duty on small cars has been slashed to 12%, and when cars are imported, as in the case of all export goods, even that duty is refunded to the manufacturer. The second example would be the case of the food processing industry. Encouragement to this industry would mean that a large proportion of the agricultural produce, especially fruit and vegetables, will be processed. It would also mean that many thousands of jobs will be created. Hence, excise duty has been reduced to 0 in the case of many processed and packaged food items, or kept at a low rate of 8%. Last week, I slashed the customs duties on edible oils in order to cushion the impact of very high FOB prices of palmolene, sunflower oil, and other edible oils. Monetary policy has also played its part in maintaining price stability. Since June 2003, the cash reserve ratio has been increased on 10 occasions by 0.25% each on the first 8 occasions and by 0.5% on the last 2 occasions. Likewise, the repo rate, that is the rate at which the Reserve Bank of India will lend to the banks, has been increased since April 2005 on 7 occasions by 0.25% on each occasion. Besides, as part of its policy of proactive liquidity management, the Reserve Bank of India has issued market stabilization securities. These securities are issued to absorb the excess liquidity caused by the large inflows of foreign money. Over the past year, monetary policy has become tighter, and the impact of higher interest rates has begun to be felt in different sectors of the economy. The battle against inflation is a continuous battle. The struggle to maintain a balance between growth and inflation is also a continuous struggle. As growth rates have moved upward, higher demand has put pressure on prices. Yet, we were able to contain wholesale price inflation at an average level of 4.1% between 2001-02 and 2003-04. And even as the growth rate of the economy accelerated in the last 5 years, we have been able to contain wholesale price inflation at 5.4% between 2003-04 and 2006-07. Along with price stability, our primary concern has been employment. Estimates are, however, available only up to the period 2004-05. These estimates indicate that employment growth during 1999-2000 to 2004-05 accelerated significantly as compared with the growth witnessed during 1993-94 to 1999-2000. It is estimated that in the later period, 47 million work opportunities were created compared to only 24 million in the earlier period. In terms of growth rate, it accelerated from 1.25% per year to 2.62% per year. However, since the labor force, that is the number entering the labor market, grew at a faster rate of 2.84% as against 1.47%, the unemployment rate also rose. We therefore have the paradox of more people in absolute numbers being employed, even as more people find themselves without jobs. It is estimated that 9 million jobs were added each year during the period 1999-2000 to 2004-05. The share of employment in the manufacturing sector increased marginally. Trade, hotel, transport, communications, finance, insurance, and real estate were the sectors that contributed significantly to higher employment growth. There is also another dimension to the problem of unemployment. This is unemployment among the very poor in India, whose livelihood depends upon earning a daily wage through low-skilled manual labor. The problem is acute when there is no seasonal demand for agricultural labor or when there is deficiency in rainfall. These workers have little or no skills that can help them find work outside agriculture. Hence, in order to provide a safety net for these workers and to assure each family at least 8,000 rupees per year, equivalent to $200, we have introduced the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. It is a wage employment program that guarantees work for 100 days in a year at a wage of rupees 80 per day. In 2007-08, 27 million families have been benefited and 965 million person days of work have been generated. It has also arrested distress migration. More than anything else, the wage employment program has brought a degree of security to the most vulnerable sections of the population, namely the agricultural laborers. Looking back, from the point of view of prices, it was a benign world in 2004 and earlier. Let me share with you some numbers which will give you an idea of the enormous burden that is put on developing economies as a result of a relentless rise in commodity and food prices. Crude oil, Dubai, cost US $34 per barrel in 2004. By April 2007, it was quoting at $64 US per barrel. In February 2008, it was $90 a barrel. And as you are aware, in recent weeks, it has on several days crossed $110 a barrel. Urea is another commodity that is vital for agriculture. India imports significant quantities of urea. The price of urea was US dollars 175 per metric ton in 2004. By April 2007, it had increased to $288 per metric ton. And in January 2008, it was quoted at $370 per metric ton. The prices of metals and minerals such as copper, iron ore, lead, nickel, tin, and zinc have either doubled or tripled, or, as in the case of iron ore, quadrupled between 2004 and February 2008. There is no relief in food items either. Edible oil is an important part of the food basket of an average Indian home. Palm oil, which is taken as the benchmark, cost $471 US per metric ton in 2004. By April 2007, the price had increased to $710 per metric ton, and by February 2008 to $1,177 per metric ton. The prices of maize, rice, and wheat, all staple items of food, have either doubled or tripled between 2004 and 2008. While rising demand is one of the reasons for high food prices, the diversion of food items to produce biofuels is another reason. It has been estimated that nearly 20% of corn grown in the United States is diverted for producing biofuels. As citizens of one world, we ought to be concerned about the foolishness of growing food and converting it into fuel. It is a sign of the lopsided priorities of certain countries that they will resort to measures that will produce fuel at a cheaper cost in order to meet the transport requirements of a section of their population, even while a larger proportion of the world's population is deprived of food at reasonable prices, or, as in the case of some countries, deprived of food altogether. Turbulence in the financial markets has added to the difficulties of sustaining high growth. As you're aware, it began with a subprime mortgage market crisis in the US. Some banks in Germany and the United Kingdom were also affected by the crisis, and they were bailed out. There have been more bailouts in the US, the most recent being the case of Bear Stearns. There is a growing feeling among international experts that the US economy faces serious recessionary pressures. Indian banks, save one, did not have any exposure to the subprime mortgage market and hence did not suffer any first-order consequences. However, as the crisis moved from one market to another, and when it entered the credit market, the consequences of the crisis are being felt in India too. There are clear signs of a slowdown in the world economy. There are also signs of rising inflation in many countries of the world. Among the fast-growing economies, China's inflation is estimated at 8.7%, Russia's at 12%, and Vietnam's at 15.7%. When stories of a growth slowdown do the rounds, investors prefer to wait and watch. This has obvious negative effects on future growth. Global slowdown, rising inflation, and subdued interest in investment make for a combination that can have only negative consequences for developing countries. Anticipating these consequences, we have taken steps to stimulate domestic demand in the Indian economy. We believe that the measures announced in the recent budget, including significant reductions in the personal income tax, expanding and deepening the corporate debt market, and large outlays of public expenditure on education, health, roads, irrigation, etc., should encourage both domestic and foreign investors to continue to have faith in the India growth story. Gross capital formation, that is investment, has increased from 22.8% of GDP in 2001-02 to 35.9% of GDP in 2006-07. Broken down into sectors where investment has taken place, it is seen that investment in manufacturing grew at a phenomenal rate of 33.6% per annum during the period 2002 to 2007. This confirms the boom witnessed in the manufacturing sector. It is our intention to keep the environment for investment helpful and friendly to investors, so that the investment-led India growth story continues to unfold and grow over the next 10 years and more. As far as India is concerned, growth is not an end in itself. Growth is the means to achieve the objectives that we desire. Among these are free and compulsory education for children, improvement of nutrition, standard of living, and public health, adequate infrastructure, including roads and connectivity, and full employment and a living wage for all workers. High growth has enabled us to increase the tax to GDP ratio from 9.2% in 2003-04 to 12.5% in 2007-08. We have budgeted for tax revenues that will increase the ratio to 13% in 2008-09. An increase of 0.5% may appear small, but in real terms, this will give us additional revenues of nearly $25 billion. It is high growth in the last 4 years that has given us the capacity to provide large sums of money for health, education, drinking water, sanitation, roads, and rural development. Therefore, it is imperative that we maintain high growth, raise more resources, and acquire the capacity to spend more money on the provision of goods and services that will mitigate the hardship of millions of poor people and bring some cheer in their lives. Under an umbrella program called Bharat Nirman, or Building India, we are implementing a 4-year business plan for building infrastructure in rural India. The plan comprises bringing an additional 10 million hectares of land under assured irrigation, connecting all villages with a road, providing drinking water to all habitations, reaching electricity to all villages, giving telephone connectivity to all villages, and constructing 6 million additional houses for the poor. We will, by the end of 2008-09, substantially achieve the physical targets that have been set under Bharat Nirman. However, the program would have to continue beyond 2008-09 so that more houses are constructed for the poor and more villages and homes are provided with drinking water, electricity, and telephone connectivity. There is also the larger and more ambitious goal of improving infrastructure. Huge investments are required to be made in roads, railways, airports, seaports, power, telecommunications, mining, and oil and gas exploration. It is estimated that over $500 billion will be required over a period of 5 years. The bulk of this investment ought to and will come from domestic sources, including government. We cannot garner these resources unless there is high growth and unless government and the private sector are able to realize and retain large sums of money that can be plowed back as investment. In short, India has no option but to aim to grow at a high rate over the next 10 to 20 years. I think I've made out a convincing case why high growth is an imperative. You will now, I'm sure, better appreciate why we are deeply concerned about global developments that will affect our capacity to sustain high growth. I take pride in the fact that India has proved to be a model player on the global financial stage. India's trade intensity, that is the value of merchandise imports and exports, is about 34% of GDP. The exchange rate of the rupee is determined by the market. India has a modest current account deficit. India's regulators, especially in the financial markets, have proved to be conservative and wise. India, therefore, has made little or no contribution to the current turbulence in the financial markets. We are therefore doubly unhappy that we should be, along with other developing countries, the helpless victims of global uncertainty. Who is responsible for the global uncertainty? The subprime mortgage market crisis that seems to have triggered the current turbulence is solely due to poor regulations and lax supervision. A senior policymaker told me that it was because, quote, innovation was ahead of regulation, unquote. That is an ingenious spin on regulatory failure. Once the crisis exploded in the face of regulators and governments, there was little choice but to rush to the aid of failing banks and financial institutions. If this had happened in developing countries, we would have been lectured on the virtues of bankruptcy. Since this is happening in developed countries, no one pauses to ask whether all the old arguments are not being made to stand on their head. The rise in the price of crude oil is another example of greed overtaking the common good of the world. What is the justification to price crude oil at $110 a barrel? Surely it is nobody's case that the cost of producing a barrel of crude oil is close to $110. Equally, it can be nobody's case that the risks of exploring and producing oil have risen so dramatically that the price of crude oil should spiral from $34 to $110 in a matter of 4 years. The same could be said of food prices. While there is indeed some supply-demand mismatch, there is no case for raising the prices so high that many poor people cannot afford to buy food anymore. I wonder what has happened to the brave declaration of the Millennium Development Goals. I wonder what has happened to the inspiring slogan, "Make Poverty History." If we are serious about ending poverty, the place to start is to make food and fuel available at reasonable prices, prices at which people can consume adequate quantities of food and at which fuel becomes not a constraint but a driver of growth. I have shared with you both the achievements and concerns of India. I am certain that a similar story can be told about many developing countries. The world must heed the voice of developing countries. In the development of these countries lies the key to putting an end to poverty and making the world a better and safer place for all of humanity. Thank you for your courtesy and patience.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'm particularly pleased that you made some very strong points in your speech, and I was going to tell you all, by the way, we do have about half an hour for Q&A, but don't leave after that, because the Minister has kindly agreed to stay on and sign his books for you also after that, and he has until 4:30 or so. I'm going to begin by asking the Minister a couple of questions before we turn the floor open to all of you. Minister, one of the strong points you made was about how we, amazingly enough, in the field of biofuels, are allowing transportation needs of a few motorists to take precedence over the food needs of millions. Now, how do you get these incredible follies in public policy? What's your explanation?
Arrogance and greed, I suppose. People who produce large quantities of food should share it with the rest of the world. We're not asking them to share it free. We're asking them to share it at reasonable prices. But a very insular, selfish approach encourages them to convert food into fuel. I think this is the most foolish thing which humanity can do. There was a long article.
And it's subsidized fuel, right? Am I correct?
And to subsidize it. There's a long article either in the Herald Tribune or Wall Street Journal yesterday which says that there are many people in Africa who can no longer afford to buy food. In India, we subsidize food. If we did not subsidize food, that would be the situation for at least 100 million people. They cannot afford to buy food anymore. If we are citizens of one world, if we claim that this planet is ours, at least on matters of feeding the people, there should be a common purpose and a common goal. I'm deeply distressed that people can convert food to fuel. There are non-food items which can be used to make biofuel, jatropha, for example. But to convert corn to fuel, to convert edible oil seeds into fuel, I think it's outrageous and it must be condemned.
Great. My next question, the other strong point you made, Minister, was about the recent financial crisis. And you're absolutely right. I was here in 1997 when the Asian financial crisis took place. And when Indonesian banks were in trouble, the message given to the Indonesian banks was that if you fail, you fail. Sorry, we have to declare you bankrupt. Too bad for the shareholders, too bad for the depositors. That's the price you pay for market failure. And yet, when it comes to, we look at the recent financial crisis, when the same banks are failing, you have bailouts. So how does the world get rid of one standard for the poor countries and one standard for the rich countries?
The world doesn't. There are two standards. Well, I mean, I don't support bankruptcy, but I think at least we should not be lectured at when we also rush to the aid of institutions or sections of the people. What rankles is when we are lectured. And then when Bear Stearns fails, there was a brilliant article in the Wall Street Journal, how between Thursday evening and Monday morning, the Treasury Secretary, the Fed Chairman, the New York Fed Chairman, worked right through those 72 hours, surviving on sandwiches and little sleep, in order to find a buyer for Bear Stearns. Now, if an Indian bank failed, I suppose I would do the same thing. All I ask is I should not be lectured. What I'm doing is wrong.
Well, I mean, that's what we try to do through the dialogues like this. So can I throw the floor open now to Please go to the mic, and since you're very good looking, we want the whole room to see who you are. And introduce yourself.
My name is Amir Jumaboy. The question, in fact, it's an explanation. If you remember, only a few years ago, we were talking about mountains of butter in Europe. We were talking about farmers being paid not to grow food and being given subsidies. The same thing happened in the United States. Where is justice? Thank you.
Thank you. Please go to the mic and introduce yourself.
My name is Tyagarajan. Finance Minister may be happy to note that after you announced on the budget date about subsidizing some of the farmers' loans in India, next day the Federal Reserve Bank Chairman Bernanke made a similar statement saying that maybe he has to subsidize the loans given by the financial institutions in America. So probably there may not be much lectures. But having said that, while nobody could find fault with what you have done, Mr. Chidambaram, if you look at the last few decades in India, where some of these good intentioned programs were given for the poor people and farmers, ultimately whether that benefit will reach the right people and whether a lot of pilferage will take place is some of the worries which outside investors have. How do you think the systems have changed so that these benefits will ultimately reach the right people, sir? Thank you.
We were talking about loan waiver. The answer is fairly simple. We have scheduled commercial banks which are well regulated by the central bank. We have the regional rural banks which are all sponsored by scheduled commercial banks and which are well regulated by NABARD, the National Bank for Agriculture. And we have the cooperative banks which are regulated by the state governments. On the first and second category, I have no fear at all because they are well regulated, they are audited, they have to submit audited accounts every quarter. So I know exactly how much is outstanding at the end of every quarter. So I have the numbers for 31st of December 2007. It's not possible to fudge those numbers anymore. In the case of cooperative banks, those that have been submitted to audit, and for another reason, for the last 2 years, the central government is auditing those banks. Those that have been submitted to audit, we have no apprehension that there can be any error there. But I am allowing myself a margin of error of 5% in those accounts. It's quite possible that some of those accounts are not genuine farm loan accounts. I'm allowing myself a margin of 5%. The write-off mechanism is very simple. Once I know that this loan was outstanding on the 31st of December 2007 and remained unpaid on the 29th of February 2008, simply by a stroke of the pen, we write off that loan. So there's no money actually going from hand to hand. I'm not giving money to the farmer to go to the bank to pay off the debt. I'm simply writing off the debt in his account. So I don't apprehend any major problems as far as the first two categories are concerned. In the third category, we will subject those accounts to audit, but I allow myself a margin of error of 5%.
Next question, please. Yeah, go ahead. Next after you, that you go ahead.
Hello, my name is Gurpreet Singh. I have a question. You talked about innovation and regulation. Now, India has produced world's cheapest car, and post Deepavali, many people are going to buy that. So my question is, with a stroke of a pen, do you have any regulatory plan to improve roads and change regulations so that people are able to drive it without any hindrance, without any pollution? That's my question. Have you thought about anything?
The nano car meets Euro 3 pollution standards.
Yes, but there's going to be heavy traffic jam because of small
That's true.
stores.
That's true. I was told that the average speed at which a car can be driven in central London today is no different from the speed by which people went on horseback 100 years ago. Congestion and traffic jams are not peculiar to India. That is not a reason to say that people in India should not buy cars or should not own cars.
I'm very proud that India produced world's
Just a moment.
cheapest car.
Just a moment. So we need to build the roads. We need to build the flyovers, the overbridges. We are doing that. For example, in my constituency, see, driving between one town and another, say a distance of 100 kilometers, would have taken about 2.5 to 3 hours 5 years ago. Today I do it in 1 hour 20 minutes. From my home to Delhi airport, before the new flyover was built, it would have taken me 45 minutes during normal hours. Now it takes me 25 minutes. So building is going on in India. Roads are being built, flyovers are being built, highways are being built. Vadodara, Ahmedabad, Mumbai, Pune, Delhi, Jaipur, Delhi, Agra. World-class highways are being built. And I think over a period of time, this infrastructure will be in place. Likewise, measures are also being taken to control pollution. All our vehicles now have to be Euro 3 compliant, and when Euro 4 standards come, they have to be Euro 4 compliant. We might quarrel on the pace at which this is done, and I would agree with you that the pace is rather slow. But I think there is visible change in India every year. This year is better than last year, and next year will be better than this year.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Professor Yang Dali.
Dali Yang of the East Asian Institute. Mr. Minister, you're rightly concerned about the rising oil prices. But in the meantime, also, I understand the indignation you feel about turning, let's say, corn into ethanol and all that. But in the meantime, though, the policies that are currently existing, for example, the encouragement of cheap cars would also increase demand for oil. In the meantime, OPEC is very likely to cut oil production to sort of as the global economy slows down. So my question is actually to sort of, I understand the Indian government and the Chinese government has had some efforts, preliminary initiatives at cooperating in terms of dealing with oil, so sort of access to oil, but I don't think it has gone very far. So I'm just wondering whether the Indian government is going to work on something more substantial in terms of world energy policy in particular. For example, if the petroleum producing countries can organize as a cartel, couldn't, for example, the oil consumer countries, including India, China, Japan, and the United States especially, get together and try to do something significant? If so, what are you working on, and how could you do that? Particularly because this sort of the high energy prices are also hurting the poor, including, for example, your government. You provide a lot of subsidies, actually, as well, in terms of kerosene demand and so on. Thank you.
If you're suggesting that we form a cartel, I would be very happy to form a cartel if I have the power. In the IMF meeting, I offered that we work on a price band. The consuming countries will guarantee the producers that oil prices will not go below a level. And the producing countries promise the consuming countries that prices will not go above a level. That we allow prices to fluctuate within a band. This offer was made 2 years ago. This offer was discussed in the IMF, but OPEC and other producing countries did not agree. I think that market forces must have some room for play. I'm not disputing that. But it must be within a reasonable price band. It's only when prices touch $110. And remember, President Chavez, 4 months ago, embarked upon a tour of several countries, and when he left his capital, he said, the purpose of my tour is to ensure that crude prices rise to $100 a barrel. Now, who knows, someone else will not embark upon a tour of oil-producing countries with the intention of ensuring that prices rise to $200 a barrel. The point is, oil-producing countries have struck a gold mine. Demand is very high. Many countries, over 70, 80 countries of the world are growing at an average of 5% a year. That's very high growth for the world economy. And they think that this is a great time to reap in the profits. I understand it from a commercial point of view, but it's hurting the world economy. I would be very happy if the G8 countries or the G7 countries or the G20 countries get together and say, all right, we'll work on a price band. We will never allow oil prices to fall below a certain level. But you should also promise that oil prices will not rise above a certain level.
You want to hear from a lady now.
Good afternoon. My name is Geeta. I'm a student at the school. I'd like to ask you, coming back to the waiving of the farmers' debt, you waived nearly $15 billion in debt. But is it just a happy coincidence this comes before the elections in May 2009?
Elections are in 2009. I did it in February 2008, 14 months before election. My experience is budgets are usually forgotten in a few months. So I don't think elections had anything to do with that. If you ask me why I did it this year, I have an answer. Why did I do it this year? Because I could not have done it in any earlier years because I had a huge fiscal deficit. It's only in 2008-9, if you had followed a line in my speech, that I'm able to bring the fiscal deficit to below 3%. The 3 is taken from Maastricht. That's a worldwide benchmark, that countries can only afford a fiscal deficit of 3%. I had a 4.5% fiscal deficit. I brought it down year after year. In 2008-9, I will bring it down to below 3 for the first time, 2.5. So I've given myself fiscal space and some comfort to take on a massive debt forgiveness program. If I had achieved this target last year, I would have done the loan waiver last year.
Okay. Next question over here.
Yes. My name is Adil Hakim. I'm from Indonesia. Coming from a developing country's perspective, there are social welfare intended programs such as the kerosene subsidy. What is the fiscal policy that you have for India in regards to that, with the backdrop of increasing oil price as well as gasoline subsidy, and also whether it is borne directly by the government or through this it's devolved through the state-owned companies such as India Oil, for example?
It's a 3-way burden sharing. We cannot pass through the price rise to the consumer, although we did about a month ago. We did increase petrol prices by 2 rupees a litre and diesel prices by 1 rupee a litre. Very small pass-through. But if you ignore that, the 3-way burden sharing is as follows. First is the oil-producing companies, the upstream company. Now, since oil prices are very high, they make huge profits. So they are supposed to transfer the crude oil produced from Indian fields at a lower price than international prices. Therefore, they share part of their profits with the oil refining companies. The second burden is by the oil refining company, who bear a part of the burden, which means they take a hit on their balance sheets. The third is the government, which issues bonds. I'm really borrowing from the future to pay for current consumption. I'm issuing bonds which can be sold in the market. This three-way burden sharing is the way we subsidize the products for the consumers.
Before I turn to the next question, Shekhar, anytime you want to intervene, please come and share your wisdom with us, since you flew all the way here too. Next question.
Good evening, Minister. I am from your native town. My question, Kandanur. My question is there any focus on agroeconomics, like alternative source of product lines like biofuel? Of course, not from the food source. Is there any plans which contributes agroeconomics?
Oh, there is. There is a major biofuel program in India. Two. One, biofuel from jatropha, and then ethanol from molasses. Molasses is a byproduct of crushing sugarcane. So after the sugar is extracted, the molasses can be converted into alcohol or to ethanol. Now, there is a major program. All sugar companies are encouraged to divert part of their molasses to produce ethanol, and there is a mandatory blending of 5% ethanol in petrol, motor spirit. Likewise, there is a huge program for jatropha, which will yield biofuels. The railways are taking it up on their land. Farmers are encouraged to cultivate jatropha. There is a subsidy for producing jatropha. There is a major program on.
Thank you. Next question.
Good evening, sir. My name is Balaji. In your articles and book, you talk about accelerating India's growth by leveraging her rich natural resources, but more efficiently and profitably. But when you talk about natural resources, or when the media talks about natural resources, typically one talks about coal, iron, and the stuff that builds brick and mortar. I would argue that perhaps the richest natural resource that we as a country have, and the most leverageable, most fluid one, is our human capital. It's all in all its dimensions. The number of people, the demographic factor working in our favor, 5,000 years of tradition, the inherent talent, the diaspora. In all its complexity, this is the rich human capital, the energy, the optimism we feel today as a population. This is waiting to be tapped and leveraged. Now, what are your views as a playmaker, in the government, on how well are we leveraging this natural resource and aligning it with our development goals? And what can we do better?
Well, I thought that it's widely acknowledged that one of the drivers of India's growth is the entrepreneurial and managerial and professional skills of our young men and women. In fact, all the growth that is driven by institutions and entities outside government is driven by this human resource. The diaspora is now spread all over the world. In the US, the Indian community, or the Indian origin community, has a larger per capita income than any other ethnic community or any other racial group. You find Indian managers in many multinational world-class companies. In fact, I would say that anyone visiting India cannot but be struck by the remarkable energy of the young men and women. You find it all over the place, in medicine, transportation, tourism, entertainment, media, television, telecommunication. In fact, the lack of energy is felt only when you enter a government building.
Except the Ministry of Finance.
There's a huge amount of energy. You can see that outside India. However, if you look at it as, when you cross this charm circle and go into rural India, you will find energy where there is some infrastructure and some occupations and options outside agriculture. You go to an entirely agriculture-based district, then there is a sense of depression, because you're entirely dependent upon the monsoon. And if the rains fail, that's it. Or if there is heavy rainfall, that's it. I'm just coming from a visit to my constituency. In Tamil Nadu and Kerala, flash floods, flash rains have washed away standing paddy crop on 250,000 hectares of land. Now, what does a farmer do? But I think it depends on where you are. In Mumbai, in Delhi, in Gurgaon, in Noida, in Aurangabad, in Pune, in Bangalore, Hyderabad, bursting with energy, bursting with energy. You find it in smaller towns too, tier 2 towns, where new industries coming up, new services are coming up. Depends on where you are. But I would put my faith on the remarkable energy and initiative of our human resources.
Thank you. We have 5 more minutes and 3 last questions. Can I encourage you all to make the 3 quick questions? Shall we take all 3 of them together? Yes. And then, Minister, if you want to use a notepad, please go ahead.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Viveka. As you mentioned, you said there's a huge growth in manufacturing and energy sector. There's so much talked about global warming, carbon credits, and environment-friendly growth. So I would like to ask if there's anything in store for renewable energy sector, if any subsidies or anything in store for this sector, for this growth of the sector?
Oh, there is. We subsidize virtually every renewable energy source. For example, solar batteries, solar lamps are all subsidized. There's a subsidy on them. There's hardly any tax on them. There's a subsidy. We subsidize research into solar energy. Windmills, wind power, harnessing wind power is a major objective, and there is a subsidy for that in terms of tax concessions. So renewable energy, non-conventional energy is a prime objective which receives either direct subsidies or tax concessions.
Next question.
Good afternoon, Mr. Minister. My name is Sudipta Ghosh. I'm a student at the LKY School of Public Policy. My question is that in view of the fluctuations we witnessed in the US subprime market and the regulatory failure that we witnessed there, and in view of the move in India to invest pension provident fund monies into the equity market, are we looking at strengthening of our regulatory apparatuses, or what is the move in that direction?
No, we are not requiring anyone to invest in the equity market. We are requiring or allowing people to invest in the capital market. Now, capital market is not only equity, there are also bonds. But the capital market is the best place for savers and investors to meet. It's a marketplace. If I save, and if Kishore is an investor and I'm a saver, we must have a meeting place. I take my money to the capital market and say, this is my savings. He comes to the capital market and say, I borrow money to invest. That's the place to meet. So what is wrong in allowing pension funds, provident funds, to invest in the capital market? Where else will they invest? Otherwise they will invest in banks, and banks again have to lend. But the capital market is a more efficient arbitrator of savings and borrowings than banks are. So I think there's nothing wrong in allowing pension funds and provident funds to invest in capital markets, but the regulators will lay down the prudential regulations to ensure that these investments are safe, secure, and give reasonable returns.
Good. Last question to the lady.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening, Minister. My name is Radhika. I just do some freelance work for the school. I have a related question to global warming. You mentioned in your speech that you don't take kindly to being lectured, on certain issues. I was just wondering, there is this issue about responsible growth, economic growth, where the environment is concerned. What are your views on being lectured, when developing countries like India and China are asked to be, responsible in terms of going for economic growth, where the environment is concerned. What are your views on that when the developed world asks countries like us to be a little careful about going ahead and keeping the environment in mind in terms of emissions, etc.?
Some of the most lasting memories of my life are the lectures that I received from very famous lecturers and professors. So I'm nothing against lectures as such. I just want you to know that. I still remember Professor Abraham Zeleznik. I remember Professor Kuznets. They're wonderful lecturers. I remember Father Coyle, an Irish father who taught me English. So lectures are good. There's nothing wrong with lectures. So don't avoid lecture classes in the school. Now, on climate change, we accept the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. We have gone a step further. Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh in Heiligendamm said that I promise that developing countries' per capita emission will never exceed the per capita emission of the developed countries. That is a very wise, pregnant statement. We will never go above the per capita emission level of the developed countries. So if the developed countries bring down their per capita emission, we are promising that we will remain below that level. So that's a major forward step, which is why Chancellor Merkel has adopted that as a starting point, in her words, as a starting point to find a solution to the problem of climate change. Now, apart from that, we have set up the National Council on Climate Change, chaired by the Prime Minister. This council is working on a draft national policy on climate change. Last I heard was that this policy is now in the final stages. We hope to be able to unveil this policy very shortly. We have gone a step even further. In this budget speech, I mentioned 7 or 8 areas where we should work in our own self-interest. So we are now setting up an institutional mechanism. Hopefully this will be a public-private partnership which will take on the role of advocacy, the very issues that you're talking about, an advocacy role to explain and educate the people and different sectors of the economy of how they should become more sensitive to the consequence of climate change, the importance of controlling carbon emissions, importance of controlling greenhouse gas emissions, importance of energy efficiency, importance of capturing natural sources and renewable sources of power. So an advocacy role is being planned. So we will have an organization for advocacy. We have a national draft action plan for climate change. We are putting more money into research and development in matters concerning climate change, especially the glaciers of Himalayas. We accept common but differentiated responsibility, and we promise to the developed world that our per capita emission will never rise above the per capita emission of the developed world.
Minister, now it remains for me to thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with us. By the way, you have reinforced a message that the other argumentative Indian, Amartya Sen, said when he came to our school. And he said the lesson we have learned in the modern world is that you need the good invisible hand, the marketplace, but you also need the good visible hand, which is good governance, good public policies. And you pointed out so many failures, market failures and oil prices and all, that need to be rectified through good public policies. And this is the mission of this school. You have in fact reinforced the mission of the school and why we are so important. And we hope that when you go back to India, you will pass the word in India also through you and through Mr. Shekhar Gupta and others. Yeah, that the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy wants to support this mission of spreading good public policies too. And the other piece of good news that we have also to share with all our friends in Asia is that we do have scholarships open to people all over Asia. And indeed, we have in most schools of public policy, you have students chasing scholarships. In the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, you have scholarships chasing students.
I wish you was younger. Is there an age limit?
No age limit. But you've done a remarkable job, Minister, of emphasizing why good public policies are important, and we thank you for that. Thank you also for sharing the optimism of India. And with that, I want to share with you a book of mine which actually contributes to the optimism of India.
Thank you.
This is the new... book signing now, please.